She didn't even look at my face before she spoke. "Excuse me. This is a private event. You need to leave." I had just stepped through the front door of the venue, the place my son had rented for his 40th birthday party, and the first person I saw was his wife. She was standing near the entrance holding a glass of champagne, wearing a red dress I could tell cost more money than my monthly grocery bill. She looked at me the way people look at something they want to get rid of quickly. I had flown in from Tucson that morning. 14 hours of travel, 2 connections, a layover in Dallas where I sat on a plastic chair for 3 hours because my knees ached too much to stand. I was carrying a gift bag in one hand and pulling a small suitcase behind me. My coat was wrinkled. My hair had gone flat. I was 63 years old and I hadn't slept more than 4 hours, and all I wanted was to see my son turn 40. "I'm sorry," I said. She stepped closer. She lowered her voice, but not enough to be kind about it. "This is a private birthday party. Invitation only. I don't know who told you that you could walk in here, but you need to turn around and go back the way you came." I blinked. I was invited. By whom? She tilted her head. The champagne glass didn't move. "By my son," I said. She stared at me for a moment. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound like a door slamming. "Right. Okay." She turned and raised her hand towards someone near the bar, clearly looking for whoever handled unwanted guests. "Look, I don't have time for this. There's a cab stand, 2 blocks down. I'll have someone walk you out." I stood very still. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I had spent 37 years raising a child by myself, working double shifts as a nurse when his father left, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so he could have real food, and I had learned a long time ago that the moments that deserve your tears are the ones you choose carefully. This wasn't one of them. What I felt instead was something quieter and colder than tears. It sat at the bottom of my chest and didn't move. I had not met my daughter-in-law in person before that night. I need to explain that, because I know how it sounds. My son moved to Chicago 4 years ago for work. I stayed in Tucson, where I'd lived since before he was born. We talked on the phone every Sunday without fail. We video called on holidays. When he told me he'd met someone about 2.5 years ago, I was happy for him. Genuinely, completely happy. He sounded lighter than I'd heard him in years. He said she was smart and funny and driven. He said he thought she might be the one. We video called twice with her on the screen. Both times she smiled and said hello and then found a reason to leave the room after a few minutes. I told myself she was busy. I told myself it took time to get comfortable with a boyfriend's mother. I told myself a lot of things. They got married 8 months ago. A small ceremony in the city, just a few friends, no family. My son called me afterward and said they'd kept it simple, that they'd have a bigger celebration later, that he wanted me to meet her properly when I could visit. I said, of course. I said I understood. I had been waiting for the invitation for 8 months. Then, last month, my son called me and asked if I could fly in for his birthday. He said he wanted me there. He said he had cleared it with his wife. He said he had told her about the surprise, that I'd be flying in, that I was his mother. He told me to arrive between 7 and 7:30 in the evening, and that he would be keeping an eye out for me near the entrance. He had not been near the entrance when I walked in. He had been at the back of the room talking to a group of his old college friends. He hadn't seen me yet. His wife had reached me first. I thought about all of this while she was still looking around for whoever was going to escort me out. I thought about the plane tickets I had bought. I thought about the gift inside the bag. I was holding a watch that had belonged to my father, that I had kept in a box for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to pass it down. I thought about 8 months of waiting for an invitation that never came, and about 2 video calls that ended early, and about my son's voice when he called to tell me he was married. "He told you about me," I said. "My son told you I was coming tonight." She finally looked at me fully then, not with recognition, with irritation. "I don't know what your relationship is with whoever invited you here, but I am the one who organized this event, and I'm telling you that you are not on the list. His name is—" "I know my husband's name," she said. "Then you know his mother's name," I said. Something moved across her face. Not understanding. Not yet. Just a flicker of annoyance at being contradicted. "His mother," she said slowly, "lives in Arizona. She is not here." "She flew in this morning," I said. "She's standing right in front of you." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room even when there's noise all around it. There was music playing somewhere behind us. People were laughing near the bar. Someone dropped a fork and the sound rang out sharp and clear. All of it felt very far away. She stared at me. I watched her face go through several things at once. Disbelief. The beginning of recalculation. And underneath both of those, something else, something she tried to cover very quickly but not quickly enough. It wasn't embarrassment. I have looked into the faces of thousands of patients over 30 years of nursing, and I know what embarrassment looks like. This was closer to fear. That's not possible, she said. Why isn't it possible? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked past me toward the entrance as though checking whether someone was watching. Then she straightened up, reset her expression, and said, I think there's been some miscommunication. Let me go find my husband. She walked away without looking at me again. I stood near the entrance holding my gift bag for a few minutes. A young man in a white shirt eventually appeared and asked if I wanted to check my coat. I said yes. I gave him my suitcase too, and he took both without asking questions. Then I found a chair near the far wall, and I sat down and I waited. I had gotten good at waiting. I want to tell you what the evening looked like from that chair. The room was beautiful, long tables with white linens, candles, flowers in tall glass vases. My son had good taste. He had always had good taste, even as a little boy. He used to arrange his books by color. I thought about that while I sat there. I thought about a lot of small things. I saw my daughter-in-law find my son across the room. I watched her touch his arm and lean in close and say something to him. I watched his face change, the turning toward her, the listening, the slight furrow of his brow. Then he looked around the room and I raised my hand and he saw me. He crossed the room in about 8 steps. Mom. He bent down and hugged me so hard my chair scraped backward on the floor, and I laughed for the first time all day. He smelled like the same soap he'd been using since college. He held on for a long time. You made it, he said. I told you I would, I said. He pulled back and looked at me. He was 40 years old, and he still had that face, the one that reminded me of his first day of kindergarten, when he'd stood at the classroom door and turned back to look at me one more time before going in. He was nervous about something. I could feel it. Were you talking to my wife when you came in? He asked. Briefly, I said. He exhaled. She told me there was a mix-up with the guest list. That she didn't realize that the name wasn't matched correctly. It's fine, I said. We sorted it out. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 12 and he'd broken something and he wasn't sure if I already knew. Mom, it's fine, I said again. It's your birthday. Go enjoy your party. He stayed with me for a while. We talked. He brought me a plate of food and a glass of water without my asking. He introduced me to a few of his friends. And then slowly, as the evening moved forward, the pulls of a party took him in different directions, and I found myself alone again for stretches of time. I didn't mind. I watched. I listened. I am a woman who has spent decades paying attention to what people say when they think no one important is listening. You learn a great deal that way. What I learned that night started small. I noticed that my daughter-in-law never came back to speak to me after the incident at the door. She moved through the room with the ease of someone who owned it, greeting guests, laughing, touching my son's arm when she wanted his attention. She was good at being the center of things. I will give her that. But every time she moved past the corner where I was sitting, she moved a little faster. She never looked in my direction. I noticed that when a woman I didn't recognize later, I would learn she was my daughter-in-law's closest friend, said something to her near the bar, and glanced over at me. My daughter-in-law laughed and shook her head. The friend looked at me again. I held her gaze until she looked away. I noticed that my son, at one point in the evening, took out his phone and looked at something on the screen with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression he used to get when he was reading a piece of mail that he knew he couldn't ignore, but wasn't ready to deal with. What I didn't know yet was what any of it meant. That came later. The party wound down around 11. Guests began leaving in groups. My son had arranged for me to stay in their guest room, and after the last guests said goodnight, the 3 of us, my son, my daughter-in-law, and I were alone together in their apartment for the first time. It was a nice apartment. Large, much larger than what my son had described to me on the phone, and I'd always imagined something sensible and comfortable, something that matched what I knew of his salary as an engineer at a mid-size firm. This apartment was something different. The kitchen alone was bigger than my living room. It's beautiful, I said to my son while my daughter-in-law was in the other room. When did you move? He paused just a half second before answering. About a year ago. You didn't mention you'd moved, didn't I? He was moving glasses from the counter to the cabinet. I thought I did. I let it go. I was shown to the guest room. It was also nice. The kind of nice that feels arranged rather than lived in. I sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet, and I thought about that pause. That half second. In the morning I woke early. The way I always do. Old nurse's habit. 4:30. 5 at the latest. No matter what. The apartment was silent. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, and I looked around the room. There was a stack of mail at the end of the counter. Not my business. I didn't touch it, but at the top of the stack was an envelope unsealed, folded open, and the letterhead was visible without moving anything. It was from a financial services company, and the account name printed at the top was my son's. Still not my business. But the number visible at the bottom of the statement, the balance, was not the number of a man living the way this apartment suggested. It was not even close. I drank my coffee. I washed my cup. I put it in the drying rack. My son came into the kitchen an hour later, and I asked him, as gently as I knew how, whether everything was okay. Not financially. I didn't say that word. I just asked whether everything was okay. He said yes. He said everything was great. He said it the way people say things when the saying is easier than the explaining. I stayed 3 days. On the second day, while my son was at work, my daughter-in-law and I had a conversation. I used the word loosely. She was on her laptop at the dining table. I sat nearby. She did not look up when she spoke. She said that she was glad I'd made the trip, but that going forward it would probably be better if visits were planned with more lead time. That she and my son had a certain rhythm to their lives. That surprises, even well-intentioned ones, disrupted that rhythm. I said that my son had invited me. She said that she was sure he had, but that these things needed to be coordinated together, not just one of them. I said that I understood. I said I was sorry if my arrival had caused any inconvenience. She said, "It's not about inconvenience. It's about respect. I want you to think about that for a moment." She said that word respect to me. To my face. With complete seriousness. I looked at her for a long time. "I think we should be honest with each other," I said. She finally looked up from her laptop. "I don't think you're glad I made this trip," I said. "I think my being here bothers you. And I think you'd prefer it if I stayed in Arizona and called on Sundays and didn't come in person. I could be wrong. But that's what I see." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she smiled the way people smile when they want you to know they are not going to give you the satisfaction of reacting. "I think you're reading things that aren't there," she said. "But if you're not comfortable, I understand." She went back to her laptop. On the third day, 2 things happened. The first thing, I called my oldest friend, a woman I have known for 40 years, who was a banker before she retired, and I told her what I had seen on that statement. Not snooping, just what had been visible. She asked me a few questions and went quiet for a moment, and then told me what she thought it might mean. She said she could be wrong. She said I should look carefully before drawing conclusions. She said to trust what I knew about my son. The second thing happened that evening. My son came home from work and he was quiet in the way that meant something had happened. Not quiet like tired. Quiet like he'd been holding something all day and didn't know where to put it down. His wife was out. We were alone. He sat at the kitchen island and I put a cup of tea in front of him and I sat across from him and I waited. It took about 4 minutes. "Mum," he said, "did you give me access to an account? A savings account?" I looked at him. "What account?" "About 2 years ago. Did you there was a transfer? Into a joint account that she said." He stopped. He pressed both hands flat on the counter. "She told me it was something you'd set up. Before the wedding. That you'd asked her to handle it because you wanted to start contributing to our household. She showed me paperwork." I felt the cold thing again. The one that sat at the bottom of my chest. "I have one savings account," I said. "I have had the same savings account since 1987. No one has access to it but me." He looked at me. "Ryan," I said quietly. "How much?" He told me. "I will not tell you the number. I will tell you that it was enough to matter. It was the kind of money I had set aside, slowly, carefully, over many years, the way you do when you raise a child alone, and retirement is always somewhere in the distance, and you never quite stop being afraid of the distance. It was not a fortune, but it was mine. He had not known it was gone. He had believed the story she told him, that I had willingly transferred it, that I had wanted to help, that it was in an account he could see, but she managed because she was, in her words, better with numbers. He sat very still after I spoke. I watched his face do the work of understanding something that changes the shape of everything you've been looking at. It is one of the hardest things to watch happen to someone you love. She forged something, he said. It wasn't a question. That would be my guess, I said. How did she? He stopped again. He stood up. He went to the window and looked out at the city and stood there for a while. When he turned back around, his face was different, older and younger at the same time. I'm going to need you to call your bank, he said. I already had the number memorized. What followed was not a single conversation, but many. Over the next several days after I flew home, and then again when my son called, and again the picture came together piece by piece, the way a picture does when someone has been working hard to keep it scattered. There was the savings account. That was the beginning. But it was not the end. There was the job she had told him. She held a senior position at a consulting firm that the firm had no record of. She had worked there briefly, 3 years ago, as a contractor. The title she used on documents they'd filed together was not the title she had ever held. There was the lease on the apartment, in my son's name alone, which he'd believed was a formality but which meant something different now. There was a credit line opened in his name 18 months ago that he had not opened. There was more. I won't list all of it. I will tell you that my son found it slowly, and that each thing he found made the next one easier to believe and harder to sit with. His wife came home the evening of the 3rd day after I'd returned to Arizona, and from what my son told me afterward, she could see on his face that something had shifted. She tried 3 different versions of the conversation. First, she hadn't done anything wrong. Then, she'd had reasons. Then, she had meant to tell him, but the timing was never right. None of the 3 versions held. He had the bank records. He had spoken to her former employer. He had, in his very methodical engineer's way, assembled a paper trail that she had no answer for. Her parents drove 4 hours to the apartment when she called them. From what my son told me, they were quiet when they heard what she had done. Her father asked to speak to my son privately for a few minutes. He told my son that he was sorry, that he had not known, that his daughter had struggled with things he had tried for years to understand, and that he was sorry, again, that it had landed here. I thought about that when my son told me. I thought about her father saying sorry, and I thought about how much ground a parent can cover trying to make up for a child, and I thought about how sometimes you cover so much ground that you stop seeing what's in front of you. I didn't feel contempt for her parents. I felt something closer to recognition. My son reported what he could document to the police. The investigation took several months. I will not tell you every detail, because some of it is still not settled, and my son has asked me to respect that. What I will tell you is that the accounts were flagged, that the fraud was taken seriously, and that what she did has consequences that will follow her in ways that a conversation and a cleaned-out apartment would not have achieved. They are divorced. That word looks flat on the screen, but it carried weight when my son first said it to me on the phone. He said it the way you say a word you've been practicing, because you need to get used to the sound of it. I'm okay, he told me. I want you to know that. I'm actually Mum. I feel like I can breathe again. I didn't say anything for a moment. I didn't know, he said. For a long time I didn't see it. I need you to know that. I know, I said. She kept you away on purpose. The video calls she ended early. The invitation that never came. She didn't want me to see how she treated you. She knew that would be the thing I couldn't overlook. I thought about the evening at the party. My coat, my suitcase, the gift bag with my father's watch inside. I thought about the chair in the corner where I'd sat and watched. I thought about her saying the word respect to me across a dining table, with her eyes already back on her screen. She was right about that, I said. He flew to Tucson 2 months after the divorce was finalized. He didn't tell me he was coming. He just showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with a bag of groceries and the same expression he used to have at the classroom door, the one that was trying to be brave and didn't quite get all the way there. I let him in. I put the groceries away. I made breakfast. We sat at my small kitchen table in my small kitchen, and I watched my son eat scrambled eggs, and I thought about the fact that I had made these same eggs for him at this same table when he was 7 years old and 9 and 12 and 17. and how strange and ordinary it was to sit here together now, 40 years of his life later. He put his fork down after a while. She told me you were overbearing, he said, that you had boundary issues, that every time you called it set me back. She had a whole vocabulary for it. I waited. I want you to know that I listened to her. For a while, I listened to her. I know, I said. I'm sorry. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. There's nothing to be sorry about, I said. You loved someone. You trusted them. That is not a thing you apologize for. He looked at me. You drove yourself to the airport at 4 a.m. for a 5 o'clock flight so you could surprise me for my birthday. I did. And she told you to leave. She did. And you sat in a chair in the corner and waited. I did. He shook his head. He looked out the window at the yard I had been tending for 30 years, the roses along the fence that came back every spring, even when I forgot to water them in November. He was quiet for a long time. I have my father's watch, I said finally. He looked at me. I never gave it to you that night. I still have it. I got up and went to the bedroom and came back with the box. I set it on the table in front of him. I was saving it for a moment that felt right. He picked up the box. He turned it over in his hands. He opened it slowly. The way you open something you've been told is important. The watch was plain. Nothing expensive. A simple silver face with a leather band that had darkened with age. My father had worn it every day for 30 years. He'd told me once that a watch was just a way of paying attention to time, and that paying attention to time was how you knew what mattered. My son held it for a while without putting it on. Dad never gave me anything, he said quietly. No, I said. He didn't. But Pop did. He meant my father. His grandfather. A man who had died when my son was 11 but who had taught him, in those 11 years, more about being a person than most people manage in a lifetime. He did, I said. My son put the watch on. He fastened the band. He held up his wrist and looked at it the way people look at something that fits better than they expected. I should have been there, he said. At the door. When you arrived. You're here now, I said. He looked at me across the small table in my small kitchen, with the eggs going cold between us, and the morning light coming through the window over the sink. The same window it had always come through. And he nodded, just once. I'm here now, he said. I refilled his coffee. He asked me to tell him about what I'd been doing, the garden, the neighbours, the Tuesday book club I'd joined at the library, because my doctor told me to get out of the house more. I told him. He listened. He asked questions. Not the polite, half-listening questions of someone waiting for a pause in the conversation, but real questions. The kind that meant he actually wanted to know. We talked for 3 hours. When he left that afternoon to drive to his hotel, he was staying nearby for the weekend. He hugged me at the door the same way he had across the room at his birthday party, hard enough to move the furniture. Same time next Sunday, he said. Our standing phone call. I'll be here, I said. I stood on the porch and watched him drive away. The roses along the fence were starting to bud. The late afternoon light was long and warm the way it gets in April in Arizona, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been saved for later. I went back inside. I washed the breakfast dishes. I stood at the sink and looked out the window. I am 63 years old. I raised my son by myself in this house. I worked night shifts and I ate too many peanut butter sandwiches, and I drove him to school and drove him to practice and sat up reading in the kitchen when he was late coming home because I couldn't sleep until I heard the door. I loved him in all the ordinary ways that don't look like much from the outside and mean everything from the inside. Someone tried to take that from us. Piece by piece, visit by visit, phone call by phone call, they tried to whittle us down to nothing. They didn't manage it. I want you to remember that part. If you are listening to this and you know what it feels like to be kept at the edges of someone you love, if you know what it means to wait for an invitation that keeps not coming, to hear a distance in a voice that used to be close, to sit in a corner chair at a party and wonder how things got so far, I want you to know something. The truth is patient. It does not give up. It waits in bank statements and paper trails, and in the eyes of a son who sits across from you eating eggs, and finally, sees clearly. All you have to do is still be there when it arrives. I am still here,